I'm doing the last little bit of ironing those seam tapes and stuff and going over that airplane fuselage in the last places that I've got. I just finished the top side and I've still got a little bit to do on the left side. And one of the things they mentioned in the book, the polyspray manual, about doing was when the tape seams lifted, got fuzzy when you sprayed the polyspray and polybrush on them, that you could take an iron and bring them back down. And of course, the farther you get into it, the less you want to use the iron because it mars the finish when you put on there, on the tapes and stuff. It leaves marks on it. When I was doing those after the first coat, while I was doing the poly brush, I took my little new hand iron, model iron down there to use it because it had that Teflon bottom and it's nice and light and stuff. And I was using it to try to knock down some of those seams. I didn't have any that really lifted, but they got fuzzy on the end because the way it picks up the paint and stuff there, and they kind of fuzz out. So anyway, I was knocking those down with the iron, but even that little iron with the Teflon bottom on it, the Teflon's worn pretty bad on it. It picked up the poly material and got it tacky, and after a while you couldn't do anything with it anymore to clean it off. I took my new bigger iron that I got from Costco with the Silverstone nonstick bottom on it, and I tried it and it didn't work any better. What they recommend in the manual is to take a piece of aluminum foil and put down or put under between the polyfiber and the iron so that it doesn't stick to it. So that's what I did, and that worked as long as you worked real fast with it, but the polyfiber material, poly spray, still wanted to stick to the aluminum. It did leave a little mark, but it sanded out fine and it covered up with the last coat. And the other suggestion they had in there in the polyfiber manual is to get a sheet of Teflon and put down on there and then run your iron over the Teflon, and that way the Teflon won't stick to the polyfiber and it won't pull and won't leave a mark. Don't really have a place to get any Teflon. But I'm up here back now doing the last of these seams, and I thought I'd try something. I've got this roll of Teflon tape that I got from Boeing Surplus several years ago, back when they were in Kent, Washington, when they had a retail outlet for their surplus store. I wished I'd got 5 or 6 of these now because this one's almost gone, and it was a big roll when I got it. I've used it for a lot of stuff. It worked great to put underneath 2 pieces of metal where they lap over to keep them from abrading and things like that. What I did is I stuck a piece of it on this little hand iron to see if it would stick on there and heated it up, and it seemed to stick okay, so I put a bigger piece on there, and I've been ironing these tapes with that, and I gotta say that is really slick. It doesn't pick up any of the poly brush. It slides right over those tapes. It works really good. I wish I'd have tried this a long time ago. I don't know where I'd ever get another roll of that tape because Boeing Surplus doesn't have their retail store anymore. All they do is sell online, I think through eBay, and they don't ship to Alaska. So New Haven, Connecticut, CHR Industries, HM-350 is the number on the tape. But boy, I'd sure like to have some more of that, but that worked really good on these irons. I wished I'd have tried that before on the bigger irons when I was ironing the tapes down to start with. I've gone over all the tapes and stuff on the fuselage now with the iron and got all the pinked edges down as well as they're going to be, and any other spots that I could find ironed down. I did find a couple of spots on that lower longeron where the tapes were kind of glued down too far as it rolls around, so it would pull the tapes in a little bit. And I noticed when I was doing the control surfaces that those really show up once you put the poly spray on them. So I went over and got those released as much as possible, turned the temperature up higher on the iron, heated them up so that they would release away from that and kind of come out to the normal contour on there. There's a couple of spots where I couldn't get it to come out perfect, but it's better than it was. I did find a little snag spot in the fabric over on the left-hand side, on the lower forward section of the left-hand side, just a little place in there where the fabric got snagged somehow and had a little pinhole in it. I put a dollar patch on it, so all of that looks pretty good now. I gotta say that Teflon tape on there on that iron really made it nice to work with. It doesn't hardly pick up any of the poly brush at all. It doesn't get sticky at all. It smooths right along and it transfers the heat right through there. The only problem that I had on this was back here on the back where it didn't stick down to the back of the iron back here, so when you'd pull back on the iron, if you had it flat, this would kind of roll and bunch up on there. But other than that, it worked really good. I wished I'd have done that a lot sooner. I've got my soldering iron heating up, and I've got a whole bunch of nut plates and stuff in there. And you can see those now through the tapes and stuff, but once you put the silver on there, they're all gonna, the poly spray, they're all gonna disappear. They're all gonna be hard to find. So I'm going to go ahead and take the iron and melt holes through the fabric where every one of those nut plate and stuff are on there, places where bolts and screws and stuff are going to attach through the fabric, and I'm going to melt those holes out. I went ahead and bought a whole bunch of CAD plated screws to fit in those holes to fill them while we do all the spraying and painting and stuff, so that they don't get filled with spray. So they should be clean once we get all done with it, and I can just take those screws out and mount whatever is going on there into nice clean holes. That little spot right there is where one of the water rudder steering pulleys go that come from the main air rudder down to the water rudder. There are pads in there and have nut plates on them, and that's where the pulleys mount. So those are the first ones I'm going to do while it's tipped up on its side like that. I'm melting out the holes for the nut plates, and I figured I'd better do that now while I was in the paint, because once you get the multiple coats of poly brush on there and then the poly spray on there, those holes are pretty much going to disappear, or where they're at. They're somewhat visible now, although it's kind of difficult to find some of them through the poly brush that was applied, and then the tapes, and some of them multiple tapes over them and stuff like that. Some of them were pretty easy to find. These ones for the Southco fasteners here were pretty obvious where they were. These little ones down here on this hinge point for this baggage compartment door, they were pretty tough to find. Surprisingly enough, even though they're fairly large, those ones back there for the strakes on the tail were kind of tough to find, but they've got multiple layers of tape on them and polybrush and stuff like that. What I did on those was I took that big work light, set it up there, and it shines enough light and projects it through the fabric so you can see the holes on the other side. I wound up going and getting a little hand flashlight here to shine from the back through there, and that made those stand out pretty good. The same thing here on the front on these Piper channels, on this U channel. Of course, the ones here on this forward one, they were pretty easy to see, but these ones on where this fabric goes over and there's a couple layers of tape over them, they were more difficult to see. You could kind of feel and see, but it's kind of confusing as to where the rivets were for the nut plates and where the holes for the screw holes actually were. By shining the light behind them, they stood out real well. One of the things that happens melting these holes out here is that fabric has got to have some place to go, so it kind of pills up, it kind of piles up around the edges here and makes a rough edge. So I've got to go around each one of these holes here and just trim them out, trim that burnt and melted fabric out of the way to clean up those holes before I spray this stuff. It's pretty easy to do, but we leave them there. That leaves the spot, of course, for the poly brush and poly spray to build up on, but it also leaves a spot for the water and dirt, fungus, stuff like that to catch on and build up on. This is what I'm doing. This is the rear spar carry-through member, and this forward part here is where the headliner attaches to, and this top part, this is the top here, and this is where the skylight attaches to up here. The skylight will fit in here, and then there'll be a metal flange that cover fairing that fits over that. And I've put nut plates in here in this little U channel. I built a plate to go around here to hold these nut plates for that to hold this baggage compartment headliner in. So I've melted out these holes, located and melted out all these attach holes where the nut plates are, and I took my razor and cleaned them all up, and I've filled the holes with these screws. And these are just common screws. Yeah, I'm going to be using stainless steel Torx head screws in here for finish, so these are all longer than what I'm going to need, but I want them to stand proud here. All I'm doing is filling these holes with the threads, so that the screw, so that all the glue and paint and stuff like that doesn't get in there and plug those up. I've got some spots on some of these inspection rings that I put in, these grommets, that just won't lay down, and I don't know why. I did everything right when I put them in there, I thought, but maybe I didn't. Maybe I squeezed them out too much and squeezed out the polybrush too much or something like that. But I've just got places where they just won't stick down. So I'm going to try something with these. This is something I kind of developed for my mechanics when they're doing repairs on the wings and the fabric on the airplane before. The polyurethane paint is a pain in the butt for them to repair because the MEK and stuff won't touch the paint, so they got to sand all the way through it. Well, I kind of thought up this idea. I don't know whether anybody else has ever done it or not. I wouldn't doubt it if they have, but I kind of thought this idea up for myself, for my mechanic. But what we did was get a syringe like this and fill it up with MEK and then stick it in through the fabric, get underneath the fabric to the underside with some MEK, which would then loosen up all the polybrush and polyspray and everything, and so that it would lift and come up so you wouldn't have to do so much sanding. Anyway, this is kind of a shoot off on that. I've got some polybrush in here that I've mixed pretty thin with reducer, probably too thin, and I'm just putting it in this syringe here, and I'll put it in these trouble spots to try to get it in there and get it worked in underneath. I tried working stuff through from the top, but that just wasn't working. The other thing is, you've seen in the book where they take these bubbles like this and put a pin through them or something so you get the air out of them. Now, if I ever do this again, I'll do it like I did with this, and like I did with the tapes on the bottom. I'll glue in my patch over the top, my doily over the top in this area in the field on the fabric below with a polybrush, and go ahead and run it all the way in and get it up tight against the edges and let the polybrush set up, and then take polytack and glue it down to the grommet itself rather than trying to glue it down with polybrush, and then squeeze it down on there, and then once the polytack's set up, then use polybrush again to go around the fabric to fabric. But the polybrush on these grommets, even the plastic ones, doesn't seem to work, even though they melt with MEK on them and they get soft and stuff with the reducer. That it still doesn't seem to stick to them like you would like it to. Well, that's going to do two things. It's going to soften up the polybrush that's already in there, going to add some more to it, and it's also going to put a hole in there so you can get the air out. Seems to be working okay. I probably put too much reducer in there. Well, anyway, that was my idea. I got a couple more of them that I got to try it on. Well, that seemed to work pretty good. I got this around this ring real nice now. It's all nice and smooth and down real good. It worked real well. And over here on this, where it goes underneath that tail strake, I got that little corner right there down. That came down really nice, and I got it all smoothed out. Back here on this grommet on the tail, it worked not as well. I did finally get it to glue down here on this portion of the grommet right there. That fabric glued down to it, and down underneath it's better. There was a little gap up in here. That's gone now, or that's filled in now pretty good. But it didn't work as good on these grommets because the fabric was too tight on them, and then this plastic just doesn't stick. The polybrush and stuff just doesn't stick to it like it does to the, well, I don't know, there's a different type of plastic that's on these rings than it is on those. I don't know, but anyway, because of the sharp edges and how high those are off of the fabric, they don't seem to work quite as well. But it worked. It's better than it was. And that's what I was hoping for, so I can go ahead and cover it. I did a couple other little spots that I found that were standing out a little bit or had little blisters on them, and got them to come down. I'm getting this masked off. I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do it. Still not sure what I'm doing. The first thing I did was I went back in that upper baggage compartment and I put newspaper down over taped it down over that floor in the baggage compartment, and I cut some poster board into the proper dimensions. I cut 3 pieces of it, 2 for the uprights there for the vertical and 1 for the top, the horizontal, and stuck them in the metal brake and bent them 90 degrees, and then put some tape on let the tape hang over the edges and then folded it over and slid it back in notches or grooves that are formed between the channel around that door frame and the internal structure. And I just put a piece of newspaper in the opening that was left on that. Sometimes the solvents used in this paint will transfer the ink off that newspaper onto whatever surface that it's laying on. Well, I don't want to use it on anything that's going to be directly sprayed. I want to use masking paper on that. But all these places here where I've masked off, they're not going to be sprayed any, so it's not going to be any chance of transfer on any of that. Well, I went ahead and went inside the fuselage here and taped off the entry into the baggage compartments there, both the upper and lower, and then wound up going up overhead and masking that all off with newspaper. So none of that is going to get directly sprayed. It's just protection from overspray. I took a piece of poster board, stuck in there, and then taped up on the side to mask off this opening for the lower baggage compartment door. And I taped all around the interior of that opening first, and then I took the old D window, cut out a pattern there on the poster board and slid in there inside the channel for that. And again, I took tape and run around the perimeter of that on the inside on the poster board, and then folded it over and then slid it all in so it seals off that channel on the inside pretty good. And then I taped it off on the inside. Well, I was gonna get those landing gear fittings done, and then I remembered that I have to hook up my bogie wheels to move this airframe down to the hangar. So I'm not going to do those right now. I can do the seaplane fittings on the back and the tabs for the belly tank. I'm going to wait for the tail post and that stuff back there until I get it in the hangar, because I need to hook that bogie wheel up there, and we'll need to handle that around that. I think I've got it all masked off. I've got everything except for the tail post and the landing gear attached fittings here. I use the newspaper in every place that's not going to transfer ink onto anything, and then I had some masking paper that I used around any place that was going to be tight around the painted fittings and stuff like that, and over in front of the instrument panel. And after getting it all done, I probably didn't need to put that poster board in those D windows, but it did help to have those in there to tape up the paper on the inside of the fuselage there. So I think I've got everything all taped up.